Hey everyone, it's Cynthia Dill. I wanted to give you a quick update on the GoFundMe campaign that I started just yesterday uh, to fight for women's rights in Maine prisons. I just want to thank everyone who rose to the occasion and gave us a boost in our launch. We've raised about $3,000. The money goes to basically legal fees in the case that I'm bringing on behalf of female inmates at the Maine Correctional Center. It's a case pending in the United States District Court for the District of Maine, federal court. It's titled Katie Mountain, and then there's 3 other plaintiffs, Michaela Sargent, Danielle Foster, and Jennifer Albert, and they are suing Randall Liberty, the commissioner of the Department of Corrections for the state of Maine, and the warden at the Maine Correctional Center, Ben Beals, as well as the defendant, Andrew Balser, the man who identifies as female and has been housed with the female inmates at the Maine Correctional Center, my clients, and has assaulted, harassed, threatened, and otherwise just terrorized so many women in the women's facility. And he's not the only convicted murderer. Andrew Balser, who goes by Andrea, killed his parents and his dog in front of his brother in 2017, and then in 2022 had a transition and requested to be housed in the women's center. And because of Maine's gender identity law, as it pertains to corrections, was passed in 2021, he got a free pass. And the jail must affirm his, not only just affirm, but the law actually says affirm and respect his gender identity, even though in the case of my clients, there's no reasonable basis to believe that he authentically identifies as a woman because he threatens to rape and impregnate them and uses his genitals, he's still fully intact, as a weapon, and tells women in the facility that he regulates the estrogen that he's prescribed specifically and purposely for the, so he can still obtain an erection. So this is like, no women I know do that. So we have a case, and it's involved a lot of legal work, even though we're in the early stages. The defendants have been served, but interestingly, the state defendants defaulted. They did not respond to the complaint in a timely fashion. So I moved pursuant to the federal rules of procedure to get a default. And now they're arguing that they should not be defaulted because there was a good reason why they didn't file their answer in time. Their attorney says that it was just a human mistake and inadvertent oversight on his part. But the consequence of getting a default for my clients would mean that all of the factual allegations in the complaint would be deemed admitted. The consequence, the penalty for missing a deadline is that, then you're stuck with the facts as they are. And also what I did in that case is file a motion for preliminary injunction, arguing that the warden and the commissioner should be enjoined, stopped by the federal court from enforcing not only the law in question for in Title 34A as it relates to prisons in the Department of Corrections, must affirm the gender identity of inmates, really with regard to no other considerations other than their own self-identified, status. But there's policy that came along with it that is just so extreme that it says under no circumstances can the Department of Corrections or any employees question any behavior that might be considered gender nonconforming. And they must use the preferred pronouns of inmates who have a gender identity. And this has just given so much power to these sexual predators who use this loophole in the law to get access to female vulnerable inmates and prey on them. So we've asked in a preliminary for a preliminary injunction, and there's going to be hearing in August. But meanwhile, the the problem isn't stopped by the filing of a lawsuit. I was at the prison yesterday visiting with my client, Michaela Sargent, and I have credible information that new problems are arising around this gender issue in corrections. Uh, according to a number of sources, a trans identifying female, in other words, a man, okay, who identifies as a woman who is a corrections officer or a corrections officer in training, strip searched female inmates. So, if you're a female inmate, you typically have the right to only be strip searched by another female. But now at the Maine Department of Corrections, allegedly, I mean, I'm in the process of investigating it, and we're going to bring another claim because it seems to me to be searched as a female by a male, regardless of his gender identity, right? Because it doesn't matter what his anatomy is, according to the Maine laws and policies, just as any male can say that they identify as female or something other than male and have access to female inmates and strip search them. That if there ever was an unreasonable search, that is protected by the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, I think that might be it. And so, I'm in the process of, you know, doing that investigation, and we'll bring another lawsuit not only about this new issue of female inmates at the main correctional center. So they have to be housed with these men who identify as women, so-called, even though they don't really. They're just predators who are taking advantage of this law, but they have to be housed with them in the same locked facility or face consequences or face retaliation. And because now the women, I'll just give you an example. Michaela Sargent was so distraught and was going through such a difficult time that she was in her cell crying out for mental health. She was put in the bubble, which is like the confinement area, for troubled inmates, and she was screaming and banging on the door, apparently. And the guard in question at the time, the sergeant, denied her mental health. And until at the very, I guess too late, because when they finally did go and open the door to Michaela's cell, she was hanging herself, and she had to be revived using CPR like 3 times, and as a result of the, uh, efforts to revive her, she, like, broke her sternum, and she was in a neck brace. She was in the hospital for 6 days. During the time she was at the hospital, she was made fun of. When she got back, she was denied, like, she was basically naked under a blanket for 8 hours with male guards in the room, she alleges, just because she's brought this lawsuit, because she's speaking out. But then, to add insult to injury, a counselor went around and spoke to the inmates who were in Foxtrot on the day that Michaela Sargent attempted suicide, and they heard and saw, what was going on, her being taken out of the facility, blue, on a stretcher by, emergency medical teams, the screaming, the chaos, "Open the door." So a counselor goes around and asks the other women who are in that same, unit, how they're doing, and some of them said, "Geez, Michaela was screaming out for mental health, and she was denied. They could have, if they had just gone to her sooner, this would have been prevented," or words to that effect. They just said truthfully that, "Hey, it was upsetting because we heard her calling out for mental health, and we heard her be denied." And for making those statements, these women were then written up, disciplined for making a false statement. Michaela Sargent herself was written up for making a false statement that she was denied mental health that she desperately needed at a time when she really desperately needed it. And so so this is an ongoing case, and and in addition to litigating the case and getting the phone calls from the inmates and going out to the jail. I mean, every time I go out to the jail, it's like 3 or 4 hours because you have to get there, have they want you to get there 15 minutes to half an hour early. Then it takes time for the inmates to make it up to where you're meeting them, and then you have the meeting, and then I drive all the way back, and, it's like 45 minutes. So, I go out there 15 or 20 times. It's exciting work, but it's a lot of work, and any support that anyone can give in this regard would be, you know, would be would be extremely helpful. We're gonna be filing, I think, a new case. We have to litigate the, motion for preliminary injunction, and we'll see what happens with the state, whether it's defaulted. But, I around the corner, we have, other things going on. There's obviously some momentum around this issue in terms of the election, and so I'm urging everyone to keep your ear tuned to the position that candidates take on gender identity laws. Because what we really need in Maine, right, is we need to like rethink this gender identity law that was passed really under the cover of darkness during the COVID years when nobody was paying attention. A lot of these things happened while legislators were working remotely, and they were misled, I believe, by special interests to think that these things were just minor clarifications of what were generally accepted as basic human rights, when in fact, the introduction of gender identity to the Maine Human Rights Act and then thereafter its tentacles in every aspect of life has been the biggest reversal of protections on the basis of sex for women and girls in my lifetime. It's an existential threat to the female sex. If if we can't define what a woman is, or if we allow the definition to include men, then we cannot protect the rights of women, and we cannot protect the rights of children if we allow a state imposed orthodoxy that says, it's perfectly natural to have a disassociation between mind and body, and gender affirming care is something that taxpayers should pay for because it's a legal right. I mean, we've done some damage in Maine with these gender identity laws, and it's time for atonement. We need to, get back to the garden and figure these things out. So press your legislators. If you can contribute to this fundraising page, I really appreciate it. We've got more women who are coming forward, who are courageous and bold. I'm trying to do what I can. Any help in the legal fees department really helps. In addition to the litigation, as I was saying, there's a huge document accumulation. I have to do a lot of freedom of access requests because the documents that are relevant to some of the issues in the litigation include, um, you know, what public records are there around this policy that came out of nowhere, right? We passed a law in 2021 that says the jail has to affirm, the gender identity, housing preferences of transgender inmates, or words to that effect. And then this like 16-page policy comes out that's just so radical that defines cis this and cis that and just is so it's like an orthodoxy. It reads almost like a religious uh, document in its pronouncements of what we must do and respect and say and believe. And so, I want to know who is it that wrote these policies because somebody did, and so far zero. No, no. Apparently, it just came out of thin air. Well, let's face it, we know that's not true. So more digging, more records requests, and you get these responses like I asked for the public records from the advocacy groups that have been into the prison to infect the minds of some of the inmates there and to spread what I think is misinformation. And so I wanted to know because when you get to the jail, you have to sign in on these sheets and it's a public document. So I wanted to know how many times these organizations were there in a reasonable amount of time. And I got an estimate that was $12,000. It was going to cost $12,000 to get that information. Okay. So help if you can. The name of the GoFund page is Fighting for Women's Rights in Maine Prisons. I'm Cynthia Dill. I'm the attorney. And until this next time, I'll see you later. Oh, if you could share, that would be great too. Even if you can't afford to make a contribution, if you could just share the link, that really helps. It kind of helps with the algorithm and it just gets the word out. So thanks again. Take care.